Hey everyone, welcome back to Husto Hops. I'm your host, Husto, and if you're new here, this is a show where I break down what's really happening in the beer industry. No jargon, no gatekeeping, just real talk about the business, the culture, and the stories behind your favorite pint. If it's an IPA, if it's an ale, whichever one it is. But before we get into today's episode, I want to do a recap because this is the last episode of a 3-part story that we've been building to today. And it's one of the most dramatic, I would say dramatic, news in the beer world, in the craft beer world, in the modern craft beer history. So in episode 1, as you can hear the bells, I guess this is an omen. We talked about Tilray, a company based in the United States, which is usually, they were mostly known for their cannabis market, and as well as some other craft brewing that they bought, like I believe it was Sweetwater. They went and they purchased for 33 million pounds, which is roughly 44 million US dollars. They bought BrewDogs. And basically within this, in the British version of basically they were filing bankruptcy, and the brand BrewDog just broke over there. So then Tilray stepped in to pick up the pieces. And then in episode 2, we went all the way back to the beginning, talked a little bit about the two friends and how these two guys up in Scotland, a little town, they met up together, and then they founded this brewery in 2007. And then basically with their art, with their ways, and they kind of shook up the industry, the beer industry for a while. They were loud. They were controversial. They were bold. Man, I wish I could meet them. They sound like pretty fun guys, but it's not nice. So they called it equity for punks. So they basically had an equity style shares that directly was sold to beer lovers out in the world. At the time, they figured I was revolutionary, but somewhere along the way, the brand that called itself Punk started acting a lot more like a corporation, like all companies do. There were complaints about the toxic workplace culture. There was discrimination suits. There were financial misrepresentation. And then the co-founder, Martin, left the company, I think it was last year, for personal reasons, and is now running a cannabis company. And then BrewDog, the self-proclaimed the rebel of craft beer, found itself basically bankrupt. So that's where we left off. And today is chapter 3. And in this chapter, it's all about what's happening right now. And I'm in Germany, but what's happening in America, what's also happening here in Germany, and what's happening around the world, because BrewDog had big dreams for the United States. And those dreams just basically were very, very expensive. And they were in Atlanta, Georgia. They were based in Atlanta, Georgia. So let's go a little bit on the storytelling regarding this. Let's paint this picture. Imagine it's a warm Saturday afternoon in Atlanta, Georgia. You're walking along the Beltline, one of the coolest urban trail systems in the entire country. I've never been there. I need to go there. So whoever's watching this, give me some tips about Atlanta. So there's restaurants, there's bars, there's art installations, and it's buzzing. And right there on the East Side Trail, next to it was a massive 12,000 square foot brewery and bar. Beer garden, big windows, free arcade games inside. It's that kind of a place you bring out of town visitors to impress them. And that was BrewDog Atlanta. God, I wish I went. Fortunately, I only went to the one in Dublin. And it was really popular. Locals loved it, according to what I was reading in my sources. By all visual accounts, it looked like a success story. Yeah. Then the sudden closure on Monday, March 9th of 2026. So basically, employees showed up to work and were called into a meeting. And instead of the normal, we have these normal staff briefings, they found out that they no longer have jobs. It's kind of shitty. No warning, no severance announcements, just peace. It's over. The brewery posted a message on Instagram that same morning, and it said that, and basically I'm paraphrasing, after several amazing years on the Beltline, BrewDog Atlanta is closing its doors today. We're incredibly grateful to everyone who joined us for a pint. And then almost nothing. Why did it really close? What actually happened? When you look at the full picture, it comes down to three things that stacked on top of each other. Well, number one, the rent. So when I was reading the sources about this story, which really intrigued me, the Krog difference, the Krog district where BrewDog Atlanta was located had just been sold for about $210 million. And with that price tag came sky-high rents. So can you imagine? Some spaces in that development were reportedly going for about $100 per square foot. And then BrewDog was sitting at 12,000 square feet of location. So you can do the math. Even a busy bar struggles to cover that kind of overhead. The second, the brand had not turned a profit since 2019. That's tough. This is 7 years of company losing money over and over and over again. And by the time Atlanta closed, the entire UK operation had already gone through bankruptcy. Atlanta was not a healthy branch on a strong tree. It was a branch on a tree that basically was already falling. Boop. So, number three, and this one is my favorite storytelling detail of this whole episode. A local Georgia brewery had actually tried to take that exact same space years earlier. Creature Comforts Brewery, that's the name of it. So if I'm ever in Athens, Georgia, I want to come visit you guys. They were in serious talks to lease that Beltline location before BrewDog even moved in. Their deal fell through because of Georgia state law that says local breweries can only serve as much beers in their taproom as they physically brew on site. That makes a 12,000 square foot high rent location completely economically unworkable for Georgia brewery. So BrewDog, as a foreign brewer coming in from Scotland, had none of those restrictions. They could bring in as much beer as they wanted. They had the legal advantage. So, in all, they got the space, but they still couldn't make it work. A Georgia craft brewery couldn't afford the regulations, and a Scottish craft brewery couldn't afford the rent. Shit, that sucks. No one won that space, and now it sits empty. I believe it sits empty. That's what my sources say on one of the most nice, desirable stretches of real estate in Atlanta. If you're a realtor and you're watching this, please comment below. I would love to hear about this. So what's left of BrewDog in America? So where does BrewDog stand in the United States right now after the Atlanta closure? They still have 8 locations from my sources, and 5 of those are concentrated in Ohio, which is actually where the U.S. headquarters is based. They also have a location in Las Vegas, Cleveland, and Denver. And here's a critical piece of context for what comes next. Tilray, the company that bought the UK operations, is still actively negotiating to acquire the remaining US assets. They expected to close that deal within about 30 days of the Atlanta closure. Now, Tilray already owns, like I mentioned earlier, Sweetwater Brewery, which is an Atlanta-based brewery that they bought back in 2021 for $300 million. And they also own a majority stake in Terrapin Beer Company, which is based in Athens, Georgia. So Tilray is quietly building what looks like a southern U.S. craft beer empire. The question worth asking is, are they saving BrewDog's remaining U.S. locations? Comment below. Or are they stripping the brand for parts? Just like a really cool car. So, we'll be keeping a close eye on that, but I think for now, that's the BrewDog story in the United States. Rise, fall, bankruptcy, acquisitions, and now empty floors on the Atlanta Beltline. Now, here's why I love telling this story on this particular episode. Because while BrewDog was busy being loud, controversial, expanding too fast, and ultimately collapsing, something very quiet was happening around the beer industry. Me as a beer lover, noticing it. Actually, drinkers started asking a question that no one in the traditional beer world took seriously at first. What if I want the experience of a great craft beer, the ritual, the social moment, the cold glass in my hand, the conversation at the bar, but without the alcohol? That one simple question is now worth billions of dollars. And every major brewer on the planet is scrambling to answer it. That question, that one simple question, is now worth billions of dollars. And every major brewer on the planet is scrambling to answer it. BrewDog's story is about a brand that got too big, too fast, and lost its soul. Although I love their beer. But the alcohol-free story is about a category that started from nothing, that most people laughed at, and is now one of the only bright spots in an otherwise struggling beer industry. Let's talk about that. So, this is the good news story of the episode. First, let's establish how big this actually is. And I want to start with numbers because I think they generally surprise people. Non-alcoholic beer sales in the United States hit nearly $583 million for the year of 2025, ending December 2025. That is 22% increase in dollar sales. Volume was up almost 24%, and if you zoom out even further from 2021 to 2025, that total volume of non-alcoholic beer sold in America grew up 111%. Good job, guys. Those dollar sales over that same period grew by 159%. So the non-alcoholic beer, it is a thing. That is not a trend. That's basically a shift of how Americans are drinking. Now, here's the humbling context, because I see it here in Germany as well. Because it's important to be honest about this, despite all of that growth, non-alcoholic beer still only makes up about 2.5% of the total beer sales by volume. Not really that much. That number has more than doubled since 2021, when it was just 1.1%. But there it is still an enormous ocean of room for this to grow. The ceiling on this category is so high. And why is this happening? Well, it's a cultural shift. Why now? Why is the category exploding in 2025 and 2026? Well, basically, blame Generation Z. People roughly between 1997 and 2012, this is a generation that drank 20% less alcohol per person. I think I was carrying that other 20% than millennials did at the same age. In a survey of 1,000 Generation Z consumers in the United States, 34% said mental health was a reason they abstained from alcohol. And 46%, nearly half, said they were simply not interested in drinking. Well, I'm going to have a beer later. But here is the nuance that I think gets missed in the headlines. This is not a generation that is rejecting the bar or rejecting craft beer at all, or rejecting the social ritual of having a drink with friends. They're just rejecting the hangover, which I can understand. Those hangovers suck. They're rejecting the loss of control, getting crazy, getting on top of the table, dancing. That's part of it. They still want to hold something cold and interesting, and they just want options. So there was one analysis that came across and put it really well. They said brands should focus on celebrating choice, not just promoting health. And a Beer Institute survey backs this up, with 61% of Gen Z and millennial consumers said they would choose a non-alcoholic version of their favorite beer if one was available. Let that number sink. 61%. More than half. Think about that. Think about what that means for every brewery sitting on a beloved brand right now. And I see it. You got Weizen beer, non-alcoholic, all types. The technology that made it possible now, I want to spend a moment on something that most beer podcasts skip over entirely because it's actually the reason this category even exists at the quality level it does today. For years, decades, really, non-alcoholic beer had a terrible reputation. It tasted flat. Dude, man, this is like shit. No one wants to drink that. Tasted flat, watery, wrong, like someone just had taken a real beer and just drained all the fucking life out of it. And honestly, that's because they had. The old methods of removing alcohol stripped away the aromatic compounds, the volatile molecules that give beer its smell and its flavor, its character. Those two technologies changed everything. The first is called vacuum distillation, and the second is called vacuum distillation, and the second is reverse osmosis. Without getting too deep into the science, both of these allow brewers to gently remove the alcohol from a finished beer while keeping the flavor molecules intact. And I'll be honest, non-alcoholic beer started to taste really, really good. And BrewDog had a good one. The Punk IPA was really good. The result that smells and tastes like the real thing, because in almost every way that matters, it is. One brewing scientist described the old non-alcoholic beers as tasting like punishment. That era is basically over. Who's winning right now? So who are the players in this space? Let me walk you through the current landscape to find out what those players are. So, of course, at the top, the sales charts right now is Heineken 0.0. Heineken 0.0 is amazing beer. It actually tastes really good. With $47 million in annual sales, just behind it, you had Budweiser Zero, which I had in Hollywood Beach. Also not too bad. And Michelob Ultra Zero. That's another one. That's too bad, around $28 million. But here is where it gets really interesting. If you add together Athletic Brewing's top 3 best-selling non-alcoholic beers, those combined sales will actually surpass Heineken's Zero, the 0.0 version, making the argument that Athletic Brewing, a craft brewery in Connecticut, is actually the true king of the non-alcoholic beer category in America. Athletic Brewing is now considered a billion-dollar brand, and here's why that matters. Athletic Brewing did not start as a side project from a giant corporation. They were not Budweiser deciding to make zero alcohol a version of their flagship. They were founded specifically and exclusively to make great non-alcoholic craft beer. They built the category from the inside, and the big guys are still chasing them. So the big brands scrambling, that said, the big breweries are not sitting still, and Heineken O now accounts for 7% of all Heineken brand sales in the United States. Just 7%. Sounds small. But remember, 7% sounds small. The product was only launched in 2017. This is young. In less than a decade, it became a significant part of one of the most powerful beer brands in the world. And in 2026, Heineken is rolling out 2 brand new non-alcoholic flavors. A cold pressed lime and a nectarine juniper. That's going to be interesting. Across 14 U.S. markets, they're rolling those out. And they're clearly doubling down. Now, Athletic Brewing themselves launched an entire cocktail-inspired line of non-alcoholic beers this year. A Bellini, a Moscow Mule, a Paloma, and a Spritz. It's getting me thirsty. They are now just making beer without alcohol anymore. They're going after the entire social drinking occasion and just bringing it all non-alcoholic. Every moment where you might have reached for a cocktail, they want Athletic in your hand instead. And then there's George Clooney. He's the man. Yes, he is. Yes, that George Clooney. He co-founded Casa Amigos Tequila back in 2013 and sold it to Diageo, am I saying that right? Diageo, what is that? Write in the comments, Diageo, for close to $1 billion in 2017. Now, he is back in the beverage world, this time with non-alcoholic beer brand called Crazy Mountain. When a man who made nearly $1 billion from alcohol decides his next move is non-alcoholic beer, well, fuck, pay attention. And on the regulatory side, the U.S. federal government, Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, the agency that oversees what breweries can legally say on their labels, just released a clarification on what the terms alcohol-free, low alcohol, and non-alcoholic actually means. Now, I'm very close with FDA regulations. I do it on the pharma side. As this category grows, so as the category grows, basically the restrictions, the government is going to pay more attention. Standards of labeling are being tightened. And it's actually a good sign. It means that this is no longer a niche curiosity. It is a mainstream enough to regulate seriously. It's good. Honest concern now I always want to be straight with you on this show is, so let me give you the honest counterpoint. Because not everyone is bullish on how long this growth lasts, some industry analysis have noted that despite all that attention, all the investment, and all the new brand entering the market in 2025, the category still only grew 20%. And while 20% sounds incredible, when the whole industry was expecting even more, people start asking hard questions. Is this category losing its steam? Are we hitting a saturation point? Are new consumers still being recruited into non-alcoholic beer, or are we just shuffling the same drinkers between brands? The number of non-alcoholic beer brands sold in America grew from 173 in 2021 to 484 in 2025. That's a 180% increase in brand count. It's a lot of new products fighting for that same shelf space, and I'm seeing it on Instagram. It's popping up here and there, and the same consumer is attentive. Not all of them are going to survive, honestly. That's the truth. It's business. It's the honest truth. And no one knows yet whether non-alcoholic beer is a permanent upward trajectory or whether it is a peak of its hype cycle. But what we do know is that consumer behavior driving it, the desire for moderation, for wellness, for choice, those are not trends that go away overnight. Now, I hope you stayed this long. I think it's really, really interesting, and it caught my attention. Let's bring this full circle before we close it out. So BrewDog spent 15 years being the loudest, the most rebellious brewery on the planet. They crowdfunded from their fans. They called themselves punk. They opened bars in 60 countries. They got their co-founder on the magazine covers, and then they filed for bankruptcy and shut down their Atlanta tap room and left their employees without jobs on a Monday morning. Meanwhile, sneaky, a quiet brewery in Connecticut called Athletic Brewing that makes beer with no alcohol just became $1 billion brand. No scandal, controversy, just a simple insight. People want great beer, and they want the choice of whether or not it comes with alcohol. Sometimes the revolution doesn't come with a punk rock soundtrack. Sometimes it comes with a hop water and a clear label. That is the beer industry in 2026. And we are going to keep tracking every twist in this story together. If you are watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment. Let me know what you think about the alcohol-free wave. Are you into it? Are you skeptical? Maybe you don't give a shit. Have you tried Athletic Brewing? I sure am going to try it when I get to the States, because I want to know. And if you haven't seen episode 1 and 2 of the BrewDog story, the links are in the description. Start there. The full picture is worth your time. So, I'm your host, Husto, on Husto Hops. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next one, my friends.